I should have known something was amiss the moment Alara asked me to join her and Liam for a special family dinner. My daughter, ever perceptive, must have sensed the trepidation in my eyes as I nodded in agreement, for she quickly squeezed my hand, offering a reassuring smile. As we gathered around the table that evening, the weight of Alara's news hung heavy in the air. Liam, ever the picture of poise, gently cleared his throat and proclaimed, "Rowena, Mom, I'm honored to tell you that Alara and I are engaged." In an instant, the room fell silent, save for the clatter of silverware against porcelain. Vivienne, Liam's mother, sat poised, her brow furrowed in what I could only describe as disdain. I glanced at Alara, her eyes shining with joy, completely oblivious to the tempest brewing. "Engaged?" Vivienne's voice dripped with feigned surprise. "How delightful!" She paused, her gaze flickering between Alara and me. "Of course, this is all rather sudden. Don't you think, darling?" Her eyes narrowed as she addressed her son. Liam's brow furrowed, and I could see the discomfort in his expression. "Mother, Alara and I have been dating for over 2 years. We've discussed this at length, and we're both certain this is the right decision." Vivienne's lips curled into a tight smile, her eyes never leaving mine. "Of course, my dear, but surely you both understand the gravity of such a commitment." She turned to Alara, her tone dripping with false concern. "Alara, my dear, have you considered the challenges you might face?" Her gaze pointedly swept over Alara's casual attire, a silent judgment. I felt a familiar fire ignite within me, but before I could respond, Alara spoke up, her voice steady and unwavering. "Mrs. Westbrook, Liam and I are fully committed to each other. We've carefully considered all aspects of our future together." Vivienne's eyes narrowed, and she let out a soft, mirthless chuckle. "My dear, I'm simply concerned for your well-being. After all, you've yet to complete your higher education." Her gaze flicked to me, a thinly veiled jab. "And your mother, well, she's hardly the exemplary role model one might hope for." The air in the room seemed to thicken, the tension palpable. I watched as Alara's jaw tightened, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. "Mrs. Westbrook, I can assure you that my decision to forego college was a carefully considered one. Liam and I are building a life together, and that's all that matters to us." Vivienne's lips curled into a sardonic smile. "How admirable." She turned to Liam, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Darling, surely you can see the folly in this arrangement. Alara may be a lovely girl, but she simply doesn't have the social standing or refinement befitting our family." I could feel the blood rushing in my ears, my hands clenched into fists under the table. Alara's eyes had gone wide, her expression a mixture of hurt and indignation. Liam, poor Liam, looked utterly helpless, torn between his mother's demands and his love for my daughter. Clearing my throat, I leaned forward, my gaze unwavering. "Vivienne, I understand your concerns, but I can assure you that Alara is more than capable of handling the responsibilities of marriage. She's a driven, intelligent young woman, and her lack of a college degree in no way diminishes her worth or her ability to be a loving, supportive partner to your son." Vivienne's eyes narrowed, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of something akin to fear flickering behind her icy facade. "We shall see about that, won't we, Rowena?" With that, she rose from the table, her chair scraping against the polished hardwood floor with a grating screech. "Come, Liam. I believe it's time we were going." As Vivienne swept out of the room, Liam cast an apologetic glance in Alara's direction before hurrying after his mother. I reached across the table, taking Alara's hand in mine, my heart aching at the tears that threatened to spill from her eyes. "Oh, my darling," I murmured, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "I promise you, we'll get through this, together." The drive home from the disastrous dinner was a silent one. Alara's shoulders hunched as she stared out the passenger window, her expression unreadable. I couldn't blame her for her subdued demeanor. Vivienne's cruel words had struck a nerve, shattering the joy that had shone so brightly in Alara's eyes just moments before. As I pulled into the driveway, I reached over and gently squeezed Alara's hand. "Hey, it'll be okay. I promise." Alara turned to face me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "How can you be so sure, Mom? Vivienne clearly despises me. What if she won't let Liam marry me?" I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her close. "Alara, listen to me. Liam loves you, and that's all that matters. Vivienne may try to stand in your way, but I won't let her. You're my daughter, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect your happiness. Alara nodded, her expression resolute. I know, Mom. I hate feeling so powerless. Vivienne was so cruel, and I could see the doubt in Liam's eyes. What if she convinces him to call off the engagement? Then we'll fight for it, I replied, my voice firm. Vivienne may have wealth and social standing, but she doesn't have the one thing that truly matters, a loving, devoted family, and that's something she'll never be able to take from us. Alara managed a small smile, and we headed inside, both of us lost in thought. As we settled on the couch, the doorbell rang, startling us both. I rose, peering through the peephole, only to find Vivienne standing on the other side, her expression unreadable. I took a steadying breath and opened the door. Vivienne, to what do I owe this unexpected visit? Vivienne's lips curled into a sneer. May I come in, Rowena? I'm afraid we have some matters to discuss. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. Of course, please, have a seat. Vivienne swept past me, her gaze sweeping the modest interior of our home with thinly veiled disdain. She perched on the edge of the armchair, her back ramrod straight. I'll get straight to the point, Rowena. I cannot, in good conscience, allow my son to marry your daughter. Alara's eyes widened, and I felt a surge of protective anger. Vivienne, you have no right to dictate Liam's choices. He's a grown man, and he loves Alara. That's all that should matter. Vivienne's eyes narrowed, her voice cold and calculated. Oh, but I do have a say in this matter. As Liam's mother and the matriarch of our family, it is my duty to ensure he marries someone befitting of our lineage, and I'm afraid your daughter simply doesn't measure up. I clenched my fists, my nails biting into the palms of my hands. Vivienne, how dare you? Let me finish, Rowena, Vivienne interrupted, her tone brooking no argument. I've done some research, and I must say, I'm rather disappointed in what I've discovered about you and your daughter. My heart pounded in my chest as a sense of dread began to settle in the pit of my stomach. What are you talking about? Vivienne's lips curled into a malicious smile. It seems that dear Alara has been, shall we say, less than forthcoming about her educational and professional background. And you, well, your own history is hardly the kind of example one would hope for in a mother-in-law. Alara's face paled, and she gripped the edge of the couch, her knuckles turning white. What are you saying? Vivienne's gaze swept over Alara, her expression dripping with disdain. Simply this, my dear. Unless you and your mother terminate this ridiculous engagement, I will make it my personal mission to destroy you both. Financially, socially, emotionally, you name it. I will stop at nothing to ensure that Liam never marries the likes of you. The room fell silent, save for the rapid pounding of my heart. Vivienne had clearly done her homework, and the implications of her threat were not lost on me. I glanced at Alara, her eyes wide with fear and uncertainty, and I knew in that moment that I would do whatever it took to protect her. Vivienne, I said, my voice low and steady, if you think for one moment that I will allow you to terrorize my daughter, you're sorely mistaken. Alara and I will not be bullied, not by you or anyone else, and if you try, I can assure you, you'll regret it. Vivienne's lips curled into a cruel smile. We'll see about that, Rowena. You have 1 week to make your decision. With that, she rose and swept out of the house, leaving a tangible sense of dread in her wake. As the door closed behind her, Alara turned to me, her face etched with worry. Mom, what are we going to do? I pulled her into a tight embrace, my mind racing. Don't worry, Alara. We'll figure this out. I won't let Vivienne destroy our family. In that moment, a steely determination settled within me. Vivienne had picked the wrong woman to challenge, and I vowed that she would live to regret the day she set her sights on my daughter. The week that followed Vivienne's ultimatum was a whirlwind of anxiety and determination. Alara, bless her heart, tried her best to maintain a sense of normalcy, but I could see the fear and uncertainty etched in the lines of her face. As for me, I was a woman on a mission, driven by a fierce need to protect my daughter and her future. I spent countless hours poring over financial records, making discreet inquiries, and building a case against Vivienne. The woman was clever, I'll give her that, but I was no slouch when it came to uncovering the truth. If she thought she could intimidate me with her veiled threats, she had another thing coming. One evening, As Alara and I were settling in for a quiet night at home, the doorbell rang. I glanced at Alara, my heart pounding in my chest, and she gave me a reassuring nod. I opened the door to find a well-dressed young man standing on the other side. "Good evening, Mrs. Kincaid. My name is Ethan, and I have a message for you from a concerned party." He extended a pristine white envelope, his expression neutral. I took the envelope, eyeing him warily. "A concerned party, you say? And who might that be?" Ethan's lips twitched in the barest hint of a smile. "I'm afraid I can't disclose that information, ma'am, but I can assure you that the contents of that envelope may be of interest to you and your daughter." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing on the doorstep, the envelope burning a hole in my hand. I closed the door and returned to the living room, where Alara sat perched on the edge of the couch, her eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and dread. "Who was it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I held up the envelope, my brow furrowed. "I'm not sure, but this person claims to have a message for us." I tore open the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper, my eyes widening as I scanned the contents. "Mom?" Alara's voice was laced with concern. "What does it say?" I swallowed hard, my gaze meeting hers. "It seems that our old friend Vivienne has been rather busy this past week. This document details several of her, shall we say, questionable business dealings." Alara's eyes widened, and she leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of the couch. "What kind of dealings?" I shook my head, my lips pressed into a thin line. "Fraud, embezzlement, bribery, the list goes on. It's quite an impressive rap sheet, actually." I paused, my gaze locking with hers. "And it's all here, ready to be exposed." Alara's expression shifted from shock to something akin to determination. "So, what are we waiting for? Let's take this to the authorities and put an end to Vivienne's schemes once and for all." I held up a hand, my expression grave. "Not so fast, my dear. As much as I'd love to see Vivienne's world come crashing down around her, I have a feeling this is just the beginning. No, we need to be strategic about this." Alara's brow furrowed, and she opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off with a gentle squeeze of her hand. "Think about it, Alara. If we go to the authorities now, Vivienne will know exactly where this information came from. And who do you think she'll come after first?" Realization dawned on Alara's face, and she sank back into the couch, her expression troubled. "Me. She'll come after me." I nodded, my gaze unwavering. "Precisely. And I can't have that. I won't let her hurt you, Alara, not on my watch." Alara's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and she reached out, pulling me into a fierce hug. "Thank you, Mom. I don't know what I'd do without you." I held her close, my heart swelling with a fierce, protective love. "You'll never have to find out, my darling. I'll always be here to protect you, no matter what." As we pulled apart, I felt a familiar, steely determination settle within me. Vivienne had made a grave mistake in targeting my family, and I vowed that she would pay dearly for her arrogance and cruelty. In the days that followed, I found myself in a whirlwind of activity, my mind constantly buzzing with strategies and contingency plans. Vivienne's threats had ignited a fire within me, a fierce determination to protect my daughter and her future at all costs. With the damning evidence in hand, I set out to meticulously build a case against Vivienne, leaving no stone unturned. I pored over financial records, traced shady business dealings, and even enlisted the help of a private investigator to uncover the full extent of Vivienne's misdeeds. As I delved deeper into the web of deceit, a pattern began to emerge, one that led me straight to the heart of Vivienne's empire. It seemed that her husband, Gregor, was unknowingly employed by a subsidiary of my own company, his paycheck signing off on the very same funds that Vivienne had embezzled. The revelation was a stroke of pure luck, but I knew better than to rely on it alone. Vivienne was a crafty adversary, and I couldn't afford to underestimate her. So I continued to gather evidence, meticulously documenting every transaction, every paper trail that could be used to bring her down. In the midst of my clandestine investigations, Alara remained blissfully unaware of the ticking time bomb that was her impending nuptials. She continued her work, her passion for her fledgling business shining brighter than ever, and I couldn't help but admire her resilience in the face of Vivienne's relentless harassment. It was during one of Alara's client meetings that I received a distressing call from a concerned employee. Apparently, Vivienne had been making a concerted effort to sabotage Alara's business, spreading malicious rumors and using her influential connections to sway potential clients. I felt a surge of protective rage coursing through my veins, and I knew in that moment that I could no longer sit idly by. Excusing myself from the office, I raced home, my mind racing with 1,000 different scenarios, each more dire than the last. As I burst through the front door, Alara looked up, her expression a mix of surprise and concern. "Mom, what's wrong?" I crossed the room in a few quick strides, enveloping her in a tight hug. "Oh, Alara, I'm so sorry. Vivienne, she's been trying to ruin your business." Alara's eyes widened, and she pulled back, her brow furrowed. "What? How could she do that?" I shook my head, my lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't know, but I promise you, I'm going to put a stop to it. She's gone too far this time." Alara opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand, silencing her. "No, Alara, I won't let her hurt you like this. It's time I put an end to her games, once and for all." Alara's expression shifted, a determination settling in her gaze. "What are you going to do, Mom?" I squared my shoulders, my eyes narrowing. "I'm going to confront her, Alara. I've been gathering evidence against her for weeks, and I'm not going to let her bully us anymore." Alara nodded, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm with you, Mom. Whatever you need me to do, I'm here." I pulled her close, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I know, my darling, but I need you to stay out of this for now. Vivienne's already targeted you, and I can't risk her turning her sights on you again." Alara opened her mouth to protest, but I silenced her with a stern look. "Please, Alara, trust me on this. I need you to focus on your business and your life with Liam. I'll handle Vivienne." Alara nodded, her expression resolute. "Okay, Mom, but promise me you'll be careful." I offered her a reassuring smile, though my heart was pounding in my chest. "I promise, Alara, I won't let Vivienne win. Not this time." With that, I turned and headed out the door, my mind racing with the upcoming confrontation. Vivienne had made a grave mistake in crossing me, and I vowed that she would pay dearly for her arrogance and her cruelty. The community center was abuzz with activity, the air thick with the chatter of the well-heeled elite who had gathered for the annual charity gala. As I wove my way through the crowd, my mind was laser-focused on the task at hand, confronting Vivienne and putting an end to her relentless campaign of harassment. I scanned the room, my eyes searching for the unmistakable figure of Vivienne Westbrook. It didn't take long to spot her, holding court in the center of the room, her perfectly coiffed appearance a stark contrast to the warmth and intimacy of the event. Steeling my nerves, I made my way towards her, my steps purposeful and unwavering. As I approached, Vivienne's gaze locked with mine, a hint of unease flickering across her features before she plastered on a saccharine smile. "Rowena, darling, what a lovely surprise," she purred, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I wasn't expecting to see you here tonight." I returned her smile, though mine was decidedly more predatory. "Vivienne, I'm so glad we have a chance to talk. There are a few matters I'd like to discuss with you." Vivienne's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, and she gestured towards a secluded alcove. "Why, of course, my dear. Shall we?" As we stepped away from the prying eyes of the crowd, I could feel the tension thickening in the air. Vivienne's expression had hardened, all pretense of civility stripped away. "All right, Rowena, let's have it. What is it that you're so eager to discuss?" Her tone was laced with barely concealed disdain. I took a deep breath, my gaze unwavering. "It's come to my attention that you've been using your considerable influence to sabotage my daughter's business. I must say, I'm rather disappointed in you, Vivienne." Vivienne's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Disappointed, Rowena?" "My dear, I'm simply looking out for my son's best interests. Surely you can understand a mother's desire to protect her child." I felt a surge of anger coursing through my veins, but I forced myself to remain calm. "Protect him from what, Vivienne? From the woman he loves, who happens to be a successful, hard-working entrepreneur? Or is it perhaps your own fragile ego that you're so desperate to preserve?" Vivienne's eyes narrowed, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of the true malice that lurked behind her carefully cultivated facade. "How dare you, Rowena? You have no idea the sacrifices I've made to ensure my family's legacy. Alara may be a charming girl, but she simply doesn't have the pedigree or the refinement to be a Westbrook." I shook my head, my expression a mixture of pity and disgust. You know, Vivienne, it's truly sad that you place so much value on such superficial things. Alara is a kind, intelligent, and resilient young woman, and she deserves far better than your petty, vindictive games. Vivienne's face flushed with anger, and she leaned in, her voice lowered to a menacing hiss. You've made a grave mistake in challenging me, Rowena. I will not stand idly by and watch as you taint my family's good name. I held up a hand, silencing her. Save your threats, Vivienne. I'm not the one you should be worrying about. I paused, my gaze locking with hers. You see, I've been doing a bit of digging of my own, and I've uncovered some interesting information about your business dealings. Vivienne's eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of fear in her expression. What are you talking about? I leaned in, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm talking about embezzlement, fraud, and a whole host of other unsavory activities. And I have the evidence to prove it. Vivienne's lips parted, but no words came out. She stood there, her composure crumbling, as the gravity of my words sank in. Now, here's the deal, Vivienne, I continued, my voice firm. You're going to leave my daughter and her fiancé alone. No more harassment, no more sabotage. You're going to keep your distance and let them live their lives in peace. If you don't, I can assure you that the consequences will be unpleasant. Vivienne opened her mouth, her expression a mix of fury and desperation. You can't do this to me, Rowena. I won't let you. I leveled her with a cold, unwavering stare. I already have, Vivienne. The choice is yours. Leave us be, or face the consequences of your actions. The ball is in your court. With that, I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving a fuming Vivienne in my wake. As I made my way through the crowd, a sense of grim satisfaction settled over me. Vivienne had been put on notice, and I knew that she would be hard-pressed to ignore the threat that now loomed over her. The days that followed my confrontation with Vivienne were a whirlwind of activity, as I worked tirelessly to put my plan into motion. The evidence I had gathered against her was rock solid, and I was determined to use it to bring her down once and for all. I started by discreetly reaching out to my contacts within the local authorities, carefully laying the groundwork for a formal investigation into Vivienne's shady business dealings. It was a delicate dance, one that required a deft touch and a keen understanding of the inner workings of the legal system. As the investigation gained momentum, I began to systematically dismantle Vivienne's carefully constructed empire. I exposed the fraudulent accounting practices that had allowed her to siphon funds from her husband's company, and I uncovered a web of bribery and corruption that stretched from the boardroom to the highest echelons of local government. The revelations were explosive, and it wasn't long before the media caught wind of the scandal. Headlines blared, painting a damning picture of Vivienne's misdeeds, and the public outcry was deafening. It was a stunning fall from grace, one that left the once-revered matriarch of the Westbrook family reeling. Meanwhile, Alara remained blissfully unaware of the chaos that was unfolding around her. She continued to focus on her burgeoning business, her eyes shining with a renewed sense of purpose and determination. Liam, too, seemed oblivious to the turmoil, his love for Alara seemingly unshaken by the growing storm. But Vivienne was a different story altogether. As the investigation deepened and the evidence mounted, I could see the cracks beginning to show in her carefully constructed facade. She was a woman on the edge, her carefully curated public persona crumbling around her. It was during one of the final stages of the investigation that Vivienne's world truly began to unravel. I had managed to obtain a copy of the employment records for Gregor's subsidiary, and the revelation was nothing short of explosive. "Gregor, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady as I confronted him in the hallway of the community center. The gala was in full swing, but the air around us felt heavy with tension. Gregor's brow furrowed, and he glanced around nervously. "Rowena, what is the meaning of this? I'm in the middle of an important engagement." I held up a hand, silencing him. "This won't take long, Gregor, but I think you'll want to hear what I have to say." Gregor's expression darkened, and he motioned for me to follow him into a secluded alcove. "All right, Rowena, what is it?" I took a deep breath, my gaze unwavering. "Gregor, I'm aware of your involvement with the subsidiary of my company. I know about the embezzlement, the fraud, all of it." Gregor's eyes widened, and he opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. "Save it, Gregor. I have the evidence to prove it, and I'm prepared to take this to the authorities if necessary." Gregor's face paled, and he ran a trembling hand through his hair. "Vivienne," he breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. "She did this, didn't she?" I nodded, my expression grim. "Yes, Gregor, and I'm afraid the consequences are about to be severe." Gregor's shoulders slumped, and I could see the weight of the revelations crashing down upon him. "My God, what have I done?" I reached out, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "Gregor, there's still time to make this right. But you need to make a choice. Are you going to continue to enable Vivienne's scheming, or are you going to stand up and do the right thing?" Gregor's gaze met mine, and I could see the conflict raging within him. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do I need to do?" I felt a surge of relief wash over me, and I knew in that moment that the tide was about to turn. Vivienne's reign of terror was coming to an end, and I was determined to see it through to the bitter end. The storm had finally come to a head, and as I stood in the grand foyer of the Westbrook estate, I couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction. Vivienne's once impenetrable empire had crumbled around her, the result of her own arrogance and greed. It had been mere days since Gregor's decision to turn against his wife, and the consequences had been swift and unforgiving. The authorities had swooped in, seizing assets and poring over financial records, uncovering an intricate web of deceit that had been years in the making. Vivienne had fought tooth and nail, her vicious temper and sharp tongue unable to sway the relentless tide of evidence that had mounted against her. But in the end, her efforts were in vain, and she found herself facing a litany of charges, from fraud to embezzlement to bribery. As I watched the spectacle unfold, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity for Gregor. The man had clearly been manipulated and coerced by his wife, his own sense of self-preservation leading him down a path of moral compromise. But in the end, he had found the courage to do the right thing, and I couldn't help but admire him for it. The sound of the front door slamming shut drew my attention, and I turned to see Liam striding through the foyer, his face etched with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. Our eyes met, and I could see the anguish that he was trying so desperately to conceal. "Rowena," he said, his voice strained. I need to talk to you." I nodded, gesturing towards the sitting room. "Of course, Liam. Please come in." As we settled onto the plush sofa, Liam ran a hand through his hair, his brow furrowed. "I just spoke to my mother. She's been disowned, Rowena. Gregor has filed for divorce, and he's cut her off from the family's assets." I reached out, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "I know, Liam. I'm so sorry you've had to go through this." Liam's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and he shook his head. "I just can't believe it. I mean, I knew my mother was difficult, but I never imagined she would stoop so low, and now everything is falling apart." I squeezed his arm, my expression filled with empathy. "Liam, I know this is a difficult time, but you need to know that you have our unwavering support. Alara and I, we're here for you, no matter what." Liam's gaze met mine, and I could see the turmoil raging within him. "But what about Alara? How is she handling all of this?" I offered him a reassuring smile. "Alara is strong, Liam. She's been through a lot, but she's weathered the storm, and she loves you more than anything. This won't change that." Liam's shoulders sagged, and he let out a shaky breath. I don't know what to do, Rowena. My mother has always been a part of my life, and now it's all falling apart." I reached out, pulling him into a gentle embrace. "It's okay, Liam. You don't have to figure it all out right now. Just know that you have a family here, one that loves you and supports you, no matter what." Liam clung to me, his body shaking with the weight of his emotions. "Thank you, Rowena. I don't know what I'd do without you and Alara." As we pulled apart, I could see a newfound resolve in Liam's gaze. "I'm going to be with Alara, Rowena. No matter what my mother says or does, she's the one I choose to be with." I felt a swell of pride, and I reached out, squeezing his hand. "I know, Liam, and I couldn't be happier for you both." In that moment, I knew that despite the turmoil and heartbreak, Alara and Liam's love would endure. Vivienne's reign of terror had come to an end, and in its wake, a new chapter was about to begin. As the dust settled in the wake of Vivienne's downfall, A strange sense of calm settled over our household. Alara, bless her heart, had weathered the storm with a resilience that I couldn't help but admire. She had maintained her focus on her business, even as the media frenzy surrounding her mother-in-law-to-be threatened to swallow her whole. Liam, too, had found solace in Alara's unwavering support. The rift between him and his estranged mother had been deep and painful, but with Alara by his side, he seemed to be slowly mending the wounds that Vivienne's betrayal had inflicted. I watched the two of them, standing together in the backyard, their hands intertwined as they spoke in hushed tones. Alara's expression was serene, her eyes shining with a quiet strength, while Liam's brow was furrowed, the weight of his recent experiences etched upon his features. As I observed them, I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride and protectiveness. They had faced such adversity, and yet their love had only grown stronger. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that the bonds of family and devotion can transcend even the most daunting of obstacles. The sound of the doorbell drew my attention, and I moved to answer it, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me expected to see Vivienne, her eyes filled with a desperate plea for forgiveness, but instead I found a somber-faced Gregor standing on the other side. "Rowena," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I need to speak with you." I hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside, allowing him to enter. "Of course, Gregor. Please come in." As we settled into the living room, an uncomfortable silence settled between us. Gregor's hands were clasped in his lap, his gaze downcast, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for the man. "I wanted to apologize," he said, his voice trembling, "for everything. I know that my actions, or rather my inactions, have caused so much pain and suffering for your family." I reached out, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "Gregor, you don't need to apologize. You made the right choice in the end, and that's what matters." Gregor shook his head, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "No, Rowena, I need to take responsibility for my part in this. I allowed Vivienne's manipulations to blind me to the truth, and in doing so, I betrayed not only my family, but yours as well." I squeezed his arm, my expression softening. "Gregor, you're a good man who found himself in an impossible situation. Vivienne is the one who should be bearing the brunt of the consequences, not you." Gregor let out a shaky breath, his shoulders sagging. I've filed for divorce, you know. It's over between Vivienne and I." I nodded, unsurprised by the revelation. "I figured as much. You've done the right thing, Gregor. Now it's time to focus on rebuilding your life." Gregor managed a weak smile, his gaze meeting mine. "That's just it, Rowena. I don't know where to start. Everything I've known for so long has been turned upside down, and I feel lost." I offered him an encouraging smile. "Well then, consider this a fresh start, Gregor, a chance to rediscover who you are, without Vivienne's shadow looming over you." Gregor nodded, his expression resolute. "You're right. It's time I take back control of my life. And I want to start by making amends to you and your family." I reached out, squeezing his hand. "Gregor, you don't owe us anything. What's done is done, and all that matters now is moving forward." Gregor's grip tightened around my hand, and I could see the genuine remorse in his eyes. "Even so, Rowena, I want to help in any way that I can. Please, let me do this." I searched his gaze, seeing the sincerity that shone through. With a gentle nod, I acquiesced. "All right, Gregor, if you're truly serious about making amends, then I'll gladly accept your help." As Gregor's expression lit up with a renewed sense of purpose, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, out of the ashes of Vivienne's downfall, a new beginning could emerge, one filled with the promise of healing, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds of family.